Right, so the next general election might only be as little as 9 months away. More likely it'll be near 18 months, as Rishi Sunak is, of course, running away from it, running scared of it. But that doesn't mean the first vestiges of how dirty an election campaign it is going to be are coming out, not least because of Keir Starmer's attack ads during the local election campaign back in May, painting Rishi Sunak as someone personally soft on things such as child abuse was truly gutter politics, because for as much as you can accuse Sunak of all manner of terribleness and horror, you don't need to scrape through the bottom of the barrel quite like that. When I covered those stories back in May, I warned at the time that this would be a sign of things to come, that such debased and dirty politics would be revisited upon Starmer in turn, and perhaps we're starting to see a bit more of that now. It's noticeable that the media and the Tories have in recent weeks all of a sudden started talking more about this issue of trust with Starmer, about the litany of broken promises and the lies he's told, and we knew this would come. But one story the right-wing toxic rags have run on Starmer this last week is one that's going to cause him ongoing problems, I think, and it's especially notable because it marks a bit of a change in tone of the tactics the Tories are going to use going forwards towards that election. Now, if we go back a moment to when Boris Johnson was still PM, we remember him being warned not to bring up Jimmy Savile in PMQs as a weapon against Keir Starmer. Now, we're going back well over a year here at this point to when this was raised by Johnson back in January of 2022, as it was, where he bellowed at Starmer in regards to his tenure as Director of Public Prosecutions. I can't imagine anyone by now doesn't know at this point that Starmer was indeed DPP at the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service. I think he probably talks about it in his sleep, he's told us so often. But Johnson sneered across the dispatch box that Starmer spent most of his time prosecuting journalists whilst at the DPS, whilst DPP, at the CPS even, and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile. Now, Johnson was warned not to go here because Starmer as DPP was not directly involved in that investigation. He said he stood by it based on the evidence available at that time. And it was widely known that Starmer wasn't involved personally, despite being in charge of the CPS as he was. Now, I think if this had been Corbyn, for example, and not Starmer, they'd have gone for this on steroids on and on and on, day after day, week after week, month after month, in ad infinitum. So Keir Starmer, however, being establishment friendly, this wasn't the done thing. Johnson lost his head of policy over this, gained nothing by it except some strong criticism in the mainstream media, especially the television media. The CPS happens to be some 6,000 employees strong, half of which are lawyers. So at the time the Savile case came in, they were dealing with some 900,000 prosecutions a year. Sure, the Savile one clearly would have been one of the best known going on, but Starmer ran a non-ministerial government department here. He was, for all intents and purposes, a glorified civil servant at this point. And for as much as I do and will continue to hold Starmer's feet to the fire over what he actually does, there's never any shortage of things that I can do that over legitimately. Blaming him for Savile just isn't one of them. Now, Savile, as we know, died in 2011, never having faced justice for the litany of sexual abuse he was found to have committed while still alive. In 2012, then Prime Minister David Cameron asked Starmer, still at the DPP, to investigate the proceedings that led to no case being brought against Savile, which he then deferred to Alison Levitt, QC of the time, to investigate and produce a report on, which found of the 4 cases the CPS had against Savile, or held details and evidence on against Savile, they could have brought a case against him on 3 of them, but they didn't do that. So there were failings, clearly. That does reflect on Starmer insofar as he was in charge of the department, but he was not directly in charge of the case. He apologised on behalf of the CPS to victims, but no further follow-up, no posthumous investigation has ever taken place, and due to the high profile of the matter, you kind of wonder why. Now, the Levitt report, well, I'll come back to that in a second. The Levitt report itself came out in 2013, and Starmer left the CPS later that same year. And with the Savile case largely associated with him, nothing was ever really done by those who have succeeded him since. And perhaps there's a reason for that. I should come to it. The fact that to this day it seems that Savile has got away with it, though, is why it is still a handy club to beat Starmer with politically, amongst those who would choose to weaponise this issue. Even though 18 months ago it was seen as bad form to bring this up, we're now in the early days of electioneering, as I said at the start. With Starmer already having shown he's prepared to fight dirty, as he did during the local elections, the Tories are likely to give him a lesson on it, because they can do it far more competently than he can. The Tories have had far more practice at it, really. And so the issue of Savile has reappeared and is likely to keep on doing so. The frothy right-wing Tory fan club rag going for Starmer on this issue right now is the Lord Rothermere Daily Mail, or the Daily Fail, as seems more pertinent. A paper so distrusted, even Wikipedia won't allow it to be used as a source citation. And they've gushed that Savile victims are turning their anger on Starmer and the CPS for failing to prosecute Savile. It really is such old news now, and as much as I think the investigation ought to be reopened up so a posthumous prosecution is carried out in the name of justice for the victims still living with the nightmare the creepy Savile left them with, it is blatantly political to keep trying to score points on Starmer with it. It doesn't help the victims. It just keeps muddying the waters and makes actual justice for them, as remote as the case getting reopened is, achievable. Actually, this is an issue that could justifiably be aimed at Starmer in part here. Why did he choose not to do this after all? Why did he not do this after the report he commissioned came out? Is it just because he seems to not like dealing with reports after they do come out that he commissions? Because he's got form for it, as we know. First this Levitt report back in 2012, 2013, and then later the Ford report, both largely ignored insofar as acting upon failures were concerned. And that's exactly what the right-wing rags can rake up, and currently are raking up. But it's nothing new to anyone who has covered anything of the Savile scandal before. Why, given the CPS's failings were found upon review, why was the case not reopened? Quite simply because the law states deceased people cannot be put on trial in the UK. Yes, there were failings in the case to prosecute Savile, as found in the Levitt report. The Levitt report can be used as a point of reference to improve practices at the CPS. But Savile was dead by then. It's too late to prosecute him under the law, as the law was then and as the law is now. If the Tories, therefore, and their hangers-on in the media like the Fail want to try and attack Starmer over this, then the question he's asking of them, well, why don't you change the law so Savile can be tried posthumously, so we can revisit this? Or is it nothing to do with justice at this point? And are you just looking for an attack line on Starmer because it's politically expedient now you've decided to do so, because we are entering the early days of an impending general election? By no means is this intended to be a defence of Labour or Starmer in any way, shape or form, but like I said, there is ample amounts of stuff to attack Starmer and Labour on these days, not least over Starmer's time at the CPS when he was DPP, where he was widely disliked, and the reforms he brought in were seen to be widely unhelpful and pointless by the staff working there at the time, who frankly couldn't stand him either. He's an incredibly difficult person to find anything to like about. My goodness, is there not ample content on this channel of many examples already of such? This is simply a heads up for how dirty things are going to get. And if Savile is where the Tories and their supporters are going to begin, expect things to get a lot worse, a lot dirtier when we really see the general election get into full swing. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content posted daily. Meanwhile, here's another video recommendation for you, where aside from being a terrible leader at the CPS, Starmer's been just as bad, if not worse, as leader of the Labour Party. So hardly a surprise that competent politicians get blocked, though at least one former MP is currently mulling over standing again as an independent to spite him and to offer up a decent candidate and not a Starmer drone to the people they once represented. And no, it isn't Jeremy Corbyn, at least not yet. And I'll catch you hopefully on the next vid. Cheers, folks.